I don't like being correct about these bad things, but it seems to be the only thing I am correct about. It's not good. It's not good. Feel kind of bold and solidify a little bit. So there's 2 feet.
Looking at your camera, tucked within the muscle shell, gives us the first look ever at the carnage that unfolds here every day.
There's that stomach coming in.
Once the 2 feet at this hurts muscles fences, stomach begins the finals. Yeah.
Don't know what that means.
The stomach unleashes a volley of chemical rounds, digestive juices that dissolve the muscle's soft and flesh. All that's left is a nutrient-rich soup, a broth that's quickly absorbed by the sea star.
So I like that one just because of the video for it, obviously, but it's it's that there is something like that that can hunt, but so slowly that it's very disturbing. So the translucent stomach making the final assault is a sentence that before I was in biology, I never thought I would ever hear. Or unfolding like a fatal flush. I still don't know what that is. But that being said, the sea stars are a very interesting creature that have everything based off of their water vascular system, their tubes, their respiration, their excretion, as far as we can understand that one, and also their ability to push that stomach out. They pressurize the middle and push it out. Now, does anybody remember the endoskeleton armor that they have? What the name of that is? I don't know why they call it this.
Oh, the catch.
The catch. So the catch in this phylum overall has a number of different possibilities. The sea stars, it's loose, almost puzzle pieces in the skin and muscle that then lock together when it tightens up. With the sea urchins, they'll have it all already linked into a ball that is fused together, and that's their skeleton, if you will. Okay. And now with the sea cucumbers, which are very unusual looking, they're just a tube. Sometimes some of them look like a very large pile of feces. They actually call them donkey dung because it looks like a donkey is taking a poop out there. pretty big too. But sometimes they look like this, and this is a sea cucumber. How does this, how is this related to a sea star or a spiny urchin or something like that? Well, it has that water vascular system. It has a radial symmetry to it, where you can see there are two arms going all the way down the side, and it goes all the way around in 5 or more spokes, if you will. Now, most of them have this kind of almost, it looks like broccoli on the top. These are feeding tentacles. And what they do they'll sponge up food around in the dirt and such like that and bring it into their mouth. You can't really see their mouth. Their mouth isn't horrifying like a squid or anything like that. It doesn't have a beak. It just brings it in and it has a pharynx there. It also has the water vascular system in a circle around the esophagus. They also have a nervous system that mimics that. It's still not a very well defined one. So it's like we've taken a step back in nervous system development in this group. But the water vascular system in the ring canal runs down the sides, and you can see where they do because that's where the tube feet are. The tube feet aren't, there's not a ton of them, but if this thing will get into some rocks and crevices because it's very flexed, it is almost impossible to get them out. Now, they have a lot of room in here, a lot. So they have the reproductive parts, they have intestines that go for miles, and that's just facetious. It's just a long intestine. And they have something at the end that links together, and this is called a respiratory tree. And this is highly unusual. This is a structure that all the rest of the this phylum, the Echinoidea, do not have. So, first of all, they have an anus, right? Okay, mouth and anus, good for this deuterostrome. They have this cloaca, and cloaca in Latin is shared sewer. So, birds have this, reptiles have it, where the reproductive organs and their intestines come together. This one has an extra branch though that we don't see other places. It's a respiratory branch. It's like a gill, except it looks kind of like a lung if you take away all the extra tissue. Our lungs have branches and endpoint circles called alveoli. This one has branches and kind of circles that go this quite a bit of a branch of its body, and it uses this to exchange oxygen, which is a really weird thing. None of the rest of them have it. But it also has a water vascular system of a sort, and so it can pulse water through this, and it can pulse water through its butt and breathe that way. So unusual, very unusual. But it has that water vascular system. Okay, it also has a very interesting catch. So, and sometimes when you pick up a sea cucumber, it will get really rigid and it feels kind of like a cucumber because it just goes rigid. But then once it relaxes, it almost oozes through your fingers like liquid. It's very, very weird. It has such a change in its body rigidity and structure that it's hard to tell that this is actually a living creature. Sometimes it looks like a pool of slime, but it's because it has thin islands of this catch and it can pull its body together from so far out that it can link those together into a hard surface. So, on top of that, not only can it get into odd spots where predators can't get to them, and then have that test the catch linked together. It also has an interesting defensive feature. It can shoot out a whole bunch of its intestines, and it's called self-evisceration. Evisceration is when cut open and guts come out, but this self-evisceration where a whole bunch of really sticky intestines come out, and this actually will clog up the gills of a predator in the ocean because most of them bring in the water through their mouth and push it over their gills. So if they get something that'll block that, stopping that water going over the gills. It's like there's getting choked in self-defense. Humans, if you're in a major way, not somebody you don't like, you can hit to the throat, and people automatically grab for that because that's a airway, eyes, those kind of reactions. You want to protect those. Well, the same way with predators in the ocean, they want to protect their breathing and they start almost gasping. You'll see them grab onto sea cucumbers or other animals will make this mucus, and you can see the mucus just trailing out of their mouth in a big gob where they can't get it out. Sometimes you can see it trailing out of their gills. And then you're shaking their heads and gasping, trying to get water over their gills. So this is a really effective self-defense. You can only do it so many times though before you have to regenerate everything. So it isn't like Spider-Man where you can just shoot out web everywhere. Okay. So, I am not going to have the video on for this one because this guy's the kid who's recording it is a jerk. But their teacher is showing him that this is a pretty long sea cucumber, right? He picks it up and it's immediately rigid. Now, if he manhandles it a little bit, yeah, it just comes out as sticky fluid. It actually expands outward in water. Okay, and look, all of a sudden the sea cucumber is getting a lot more limp here, and it'll actually start dripping through his hands, and that stupid is just hurting the sea cucumber even more. Yeah, he can grow them back. Yeah, that was my question too when I first I was like, that doesn't sound like a good idea. It doesn't sound like a survival method, right? Yeah, they have a slow metabolism and they can regrow parts of it, from what I understand. How they exactly like cut and paste or whatever they're doing for the interim, I don't know. Yes. Yeah, lobes of the liver. Yeah, it's just something I would like to learn about because if it's falling out and part of it's losing it, how do they connect the ends together too? There's a lot of regeneration stuff I haven't found out about with that. There's probably some very smart people figuring it out, but not me. Okay, so a couple videos, they're pretty neat. What's also interesting is, first of all, I'll start with this tag along. This fish has a mutualistic interaction with the sea cucumber. It will actually take a long thin tail and wiggle it into the anus and back into it and use it as a home, a defensive mechanism, because a lot of things don't eat sea cucumbers because they can. Right. Okay. Won't attack these things. First of all, they don't look like an animal a lot of the time. They're kind of hidden in the sand, but also they have those self-defense mechanisms, and some of them are incredibly toxic. For those people who are reef heads, people who like saltwater tanks, you'll know that it's a risk to have a sea cucumber in with a whole bunch of thousands of dollars of coral and everything else, because if they die, they tend to kill the tank unless it's really well maintained. Okay. So you have to have a careful balance. And McLean's survived for years and he just disappeared in one of the tanks. I think he's died, but we've been taking care of the tanks and the students have taken care of the tanks quite a lot. So the tag-along get a home that's protected, and they also clean off detritus off and algae and parasites off the sea cucumber. So there's food and health benefit. Okay. Now, I cannot remember. Oh, right. Okay, so I talked about some of these spines in the sea star being rather extreme. Well, I give to you the crown of thorns. I can give you one guess on why it's called that. They are extremely spiny. They're large sea stars, and they are predators of the utmost degree. Now, you can't quite see it here, but this is coral that's alive, and this is coral that's dead, where the sea star has run over it like a big vacuum. And if you have these crown of thorns on a coral reef, you can follow their trail because they just go straight. And you can see just this bleached, dead coral where it went over everything and ate everything there. It doesn't look for a bivalve and just rip it open and it eats everything with flesh in that whole line. Now, the problem is that you can have surges of these crown of thorns, and there's not a lot of things that will eat them because it has all those thorns. Um, Groupers sometimes will do it, but there's not a lot of natural predators for them. And we've had a surge of that in the Caribbean, of course. Let's get a couple of lichens in. But what they've been doing at these major reef systems is providing a bounty for them, like they did for the lionfish when they came out of, they infested that area and were way out of proportion. Um, I have high hopes for that. I haven't seen a crown of thorns myself, which is good in Grenada, but I know with the lionfish, when we put out a bounty on it, everybody was spearfishing them. We used to see hundreds, and I saw two this last time. They're really good eating, by the way. They're fantastic. So there is a positive to being able to have a bounty out for some of these things. Now, again, it's an ecology. There has to be a balance for these things, and if they surge way out of proportion, it can really harm those coral reefs. So, crown of thorns. Tell your friends. Okay. Any questions on the Crinoidea phylum? Okay. We're to the last one. And I'm going to go fairly quickly through this phylum. There are a lot of classes. They are a little bit, many of them are a little bit more well known to you because many of them are terrestrial, bless you, or something we've known about for a while. So this phylum Chordata, of course, and I'm going to show you a different phylogenetic tree here. We have a main chordate branch, and from there it's developed into a number of different, very wide-ranging in characteristics, or what it looks like, chordates. So everything's chordate in here. Not all of them are vertebrates, though. There are two whole classes that are not vertebrates with a spinal column, but they follow all the rest of the characteristics for vertebrate. Okay. So, or for a chordate. So make sure not to get chordate and vertebrate mixed up. The chordates are everything. The vertebrates are everything except the tunicates and the lancelets. Okay. So after that, we'll talk about jawless fish, bony fish, cartilage fish, and then we talk about amphibians, reptiles, birds, and of course, mammals, which I hope all of us are. Okay, and we're going to have different characteristics for all of them. These are all deuterostromes. These are all three tissue layers. Okay, but now we have different characteristics for each one of them. Like everything past Agnatha has jaws, like jointed jaws. Everything past Osteichthyes has lungs. Everything amphibia and on up have limbs. Okay, so we're moving upward that way. So, what do all of these things have in common? It is a backbone. It is really 5 different things. So, at some time in their embryonic development, they look like this or something similar to this. You, me, a lizard have similar characteristics. They're not exactly the same. They don't look exactly the same as this, but they have some characteristics. They have a head and a tail, and yes, at one point you did have a tail, a postanal tail. Here's the anus, there's the tail. Post is behind. Postanal tail. Okay. You have a brain, so cephalization, which means there's actually brain at one point, not distributed anywhere else. And you have this nerve cord, and it's hollow. It's a hollow ball of nerve cells. Later on, it changes. And underneath that is a pressurized tube, kind of like a liquid filled animal shape balloon, the clown balloon, okay, where they can twist in different shapes, but it's full of a liquid, and that's called the notochord. Later on, this will develop into the spinal column on most of the animals we're talking. It'll wrap, it'll wrap around this dorsal hollow nerve cord. And we do have a full intestine, okay, input and output, but that isn't the important part. Along it, we have these little slits. They're called pharyngeal slits because it's part of the pharynx at one point. They don't turn into, traditionally, they don't turn into like their vocal cords or something like that. These sets of cells will turn into different parts of their internal organs, like the blood and circulation system. Some will turn into the lungs. Some will turn into the accessory organs or some parts of the around the brain, I believe. So we have all of this, and then we have some kind of supply to the nutrients, but that's not one of the main things. Now, on top of this, I want you to put in thyroid. Because in the book, they have these four things, but all the current literature would point to every animal has a thyroid-like set of cells. Now, thyroid on us is kind of a butterfly-like thing that sits on either side of our throat and has a thin connection of tissue. It was those bean-like things you took off the throat. Oh, wait, we haven't done that. It's this semester we haven't gotten to it. When we get to the pigs, when you cut open the pigs just above the actual hard part of the trachea, there's going to be a little bean-like thing we're going to pull out because it's in the way. And that's going to be a thyroid for that. The thyroid helps control growth, and it has iodine-based enzymes in there. And so if you have hypothyroidism, you are not putting out enough regulatory hormones to have a high enough normal metabolism. So you're feeling lethargic all the time. If you have hyperthyroidism, that means you're having increased metabolism. So you can have surgeries and or chemicals that will help control your metabolism. If you have a thyroidectomy, which is taking out the thyroid because it might be cancerous or something like that, or it's damaged. You can have stuff that'll slow down your metabolism because there are bad things for that as well. But the thyroid is something that all of the phylum Chordata has. And we're just starting to acknowledge it because we're having the techniques to localize and identify. Some of these organisms do not look like us at all, outside of having these characteristics, but they turned out that they do have thyroid-like tissues that act like a thyroid. They might not have a big old ball of a thyroid or a butterfly shape like us, but it actually works like a thyroid. So it is now starting to be accepted, if not official yet, that we haven't run into an exception to this. So right now, thyroid or thyroid-like tissues are also on this list. Okay. Something to update from the book. So we're going to talk about the first two that have no backbone first. Subphylum Cephalochordata. Cephalo, head, and cord here. So these are small, and I forgot to bring them in, but they're only like this long. Sometimes a little bit longer, but they're only this long. So they are not to scale in this picture. They're basically kind of looking a little bit like minnows, but once you look at them closer, they're not minnows. They have just this filter feeder mouth where they, in a weird tail that kind of looks like a tail, but it doesn't work that well. They stick their tail in the sediment and the rocks and just stick their mouth out into the current so that the current will push food through into their gills, push the liquid through them, get the oxygen out, and exchange CO2, and then it goes into their esophagus. They have a very short intestine and stomach area, and then it goes right out. So they have the postanal tail, here's the anus, here's the tail. They have a dorsal hollow nerve cord, and they have a notochord. So the notochord is underneath. It's a very weird notochord though. They have what was it? Oh, and they also apparently have thyroid-like tissues. Okay. Now, this is your first experience with gills that we really talked about. But the whole idea of the gills is we're running over a ton of water over it that has oxygen in it. A low amount of oxygen, but oxygen. And it runs over a blood system. A blood system that is going at a right angle or opposite blood flow to this. And that's important. I'll explain later why. But as it's going over there, there's increased surface area of those small, thin tubes of blood that are exchanging oxygen across a very thin membrane. So it's diffusion. We just need to have enough water going over it to make it work. So they have a crude gill that basically is all the water that is getting forced down their throat, literally, and the food goes down to the intestine, and the water goes out the sides, kind of squirted out. And on the other side, closely overlaid, are the blood vessels. And the blood vessels will exchange oxygen with CO2. So in this case, the pharyngeal slits that we talked about last time actually work as part of the throat and turn into gills, crude gills. Okay. Now, the other thing, the notochord, when I mentioned it was usually just this weird kind of liquid-filled tube. It's fairly rigid, and it helps support the development of the nerve cord above it in the correct direction. Later on, in other organisms, it develops and wraps around the whole nerve cord and gets bony protrusions. It's a vertebra. But in these organisms, what it does is just support and interacts with that nerve cord to make sure that everything's hooked together. And they have muscles inside of this one and a jelly-like substance that will keep it coming back to the center line to keep it in line. If you take a balloon and bend it out of the way and let go, unless you've done something weird to that balloon, it snaps right back into that just straight shape, right? It does. I keep forgetting to bring in balloons, but I'm not one of those people that does. I can make a snake. That's about it. Okay. So with this one, they have the dorsal hollow nerve cord that has the liquid, but it has actual muscles in it and connections to the nerve cord. And the muscles inside of it twitch it to one side or the other. And then it relaxes. So if it pulls the notochord to one side and then relaxes, it's like it's swimming tail. And it pulls it the other way and lets go, and it whips back. It's an efficient way to not have to have a ton of muscles, like one to pull it this way and one to pull it this way every time it swims. It just pulls it to one side and relaxes, and it comes back, causing thrust. It is not the most efficient swimming tail ever, but it gets them where they need to go. And they use the notochord as part of their mechanical swim, which is kind of interesting. I think it's interesting. So I just want to share it. Okay. The next subphylum is Urocaudata, and it's called the tunicates. A tunic is an old style idea of kind of a loose fitting shirt from the Middle Ages. People still have it as a piece of clothing. But a tunic, this thing does not look like this at all, does it? It has a couple tissue layers here. Some of them you can't see, but it looks like there's an inner layer covered with the outer layer, and it kind of looks short, like I don't know. I'd have to squint and look sideways and maybe take off my glasses. But it has an in current valve and an out current. The in current is on this outside kind of tunic, and the out current is coming from this inside sleeve. I'm keeping with that theme, okay? So it has, at one point of its life, a postanal tail. It has a notochord. It has thyroid-like tissues. Okay. It has all of these things. But as an adult, it doesn't have all these things. Okay. When it's young, it can swim around. So it has that tail. And then later on, it changes. The adults just sit there looking like this. They're very pretty, but this is not to scale. Some of them are like this. So let's take a look at what happens in their very tumultuous teenage years. They start out as a larva. Okay, they have a tail, and they have a notochord and a why am I having a brain fart here? Oh, a notochord and a nerve cord there. Okay, running down the entire length. And they use that muscle where they pull it and relax it, and it'll snap back to center because of the notochord to use it as swimming. It's, again, not a great swimmer, but it'll do it. It has this weird pharyngeal slits that kind of develop into this almost basket, it looks like. It has intestines, and it has these weird adhesive papillae at the end. Basically, as it gets into this close to adulthood, it'll run into a surface it feels is fine, and a very, very fast transition happens. It'll extend these landers, these adhesive papillae. They'll stick to that surface, and once it does, about 10 minutes later, it starts, well, changing its body. This is a very abrupt teenage years. So it'll attach, and then it starts retracting its nerve cord and its notochord and dissolving it. It doesn't need it anymore. Very, very old style cars, older than mine. Okay, they used to have a retractable antenna, a big metal antenna. You push a button and they go. So people wouldn't break them off for some reason. It's beyond my time. But this one will just retract it, and it's within 5 to 10 minutes. It's gotten rid of its spinal column, basically. Its notochord and its dorsal hollow nerve cord. It doesn't need it anymore. I'm glad we don't have one of those buttons. That could be dangerous. Okay, put a cover on that one at least. And within 18 hours, it's changed its whole body type. There's no notochord, there's no spinal, nerve cord, and that basket that you saw has overdeveloped, it's expanded, and now there's in current from there. It'll bring in water and then push it out through this push it out through these holes in the sieve and then go out from there. When you look at this sieve closer, and I did get it backwards, I don't know, I'm having a brain fart today, so sorry. In current and X current, there. Okay, when you look at these closer, they're called stigmata, and not like holes in the hand bleeding and stuff. It's a hole where it has the swirly pattern of a lot of tissue there. And this tissue provides very small holes in cilia over the gaps, so the water can get through, but any macro nutrients like pieces of dead fish or organics or whatever will be brought in, caught, and passed by the cilia to here, where its esophagus is. So it's kind of body served to be put into the intestine. So all of this is a sieve that's all the food is caught and passed into here. So it's a filter feeder. And then it'll go through the intestine. It has some accessory organs. It even has some tissues that are thyroid-like still. It's kind of in a band around here, apparently. and then that water will be pushed out. So it respires, it exchanges gases with the water, and it will release the excretion. So in this case, it's mostly ammonia as far as I remember. There's a little bit of urea in there, but mostly ammonia, and it'll get pushed out there. It has a heart. It's kind of weird. It has a heart, and it has almost a closed circulatory system right around the organs. The few it has, it kind of goes over it, and it goes into the organs, and apparently is picked up from there. It is difficult to dissect these things because they are basically two tissue layers, and you can see through them. And if you take them out of the water, they kind of crust into a gelatinous goo. They don't really have a skeletal system, so good luck with dissecting that while it's moving in floating in the water. But it has a pretty interesting transition. So it does have a notochord. It has a post-anal tail at one point of its life, and then it gets rid of it because it doesn't need it. It's living the good life as a filter feeder. Okay, all alone by itself. As I get older, I really appreciate that. Okay, so those are the two that do not have a spinal column. They have all the rest of the characteristics. So subphylum Vertebrata, though, we do have a vertebra or a vertebral column. So the notochord is there at early development, and then it develops into this vertebral column, which wraps around the dorsal hollow nerve cord. We have a skull now, and we have a spinal column. So we have a big shift, and this is a big step when we're all of a sudden developmentally wrapping around another one and making it less flexible instead of more flexible. So there's got to be a good reason for this. Okay. So everything else in all the rest of the classes in this phylum have a vertebrate column. Agnathans. Nathans referred to teeth or jaws. And A means without. So agnatha. This is a group that's been around for a long time on the fossil records. We have a lot of fossil records of these things. But they haven't really developed jaws in that whole time. This is something that you usually see with evolutionary trees, just to inform you about this, where they're looking for either a genetic link if they're doing a retrogressive study, or a fossil link here, and then they figure out how long they see those fossils until they die out. So this is an evolutionary tree where there's a number of different species based on their skeletal system and their characteristics, and then you keep track of them for how long they lived through the number of different like Jurassic, Cretaceous, Tertiary, and areas. So there, the evolutionary theory, as well as some evidence for these fossils, show that some of these died off. And depending on where you stop seeing them in the fossil layers is where they say that's where it died. Okay, but we see fossil records all the way through this from very early on for the agnathids. That's all it's showing. But you'll notice that a number of the rest of the fish that have jaws and such like that, there's many that died out. We stopped seeing them in the fossil records, but some of them still live today. And that's what I just want you to know is this is how you read one of those charts. They have different time periods. Okay. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about this with fossil records and such like that, we have some nice archaeology and anthropology classes with a Christian focus. So it's very rare to get one of those. Okay, so the two main groups that you're going to need to know are hagfish and lampreys. Hagfish are primarily in the marine environment, but lampreys have a very unusual characteristic. There are very few animals that can go from saltwater to freshwater and survive. They do that. We actually see lampreys in the Great Lakes, And if we're any closer to the lake and start shocking, you might have some nightmares because all of a sudden what looked like a sandy bottom will erupt with a whole bunch of little eels or snakes. And they're little baby lampreys because they start their lives filter feeding in the river. But for those people who have snake phobias, having the river full of snakes at your feet all of a sudden just exploding out of them can be rather disturbing. Trust me on this. Okay. But they are just lampreys. Now, lampreys can get to be about this long, hagfish even longer. But the lampreys will suck onto a fish or passing by or what have you, and they can't close their jaws, but they have a mouth opening and they have a whole bunch of chitinous teeth, and they'll suction onto this and then flex it a little bit to worry at the flesh and scrape at it until they get blood, and then they will just take that blood in as ingestion. And this can be a problem for these fish because you can see that there are two lampreys here attached. One of them is on a perfect spot for a lot of blood, which is the gills. It's probably not good for the fish. And then there's also lesions on these fish. This is a lake trout. We used to have hundreds of tons of lake trout caught, and it was an actual really nice economic boost for the Wisconsin and upper Midwest area, or yeah, upper Midwest area. But lampreys and other invasive species and overfishing all cause this to be wiped out. Overall, we can catch lake trout now, but the lampreys have really kept down the numbers because if you have large lesions out in the ocean or in the sea, you do not have a selective advantage where you're damaged and you can get infections that way. Currently, we're really working on killing these things off because not only are they ugly, but they're ruining the environment. As soon as we open the St. Lawrence Seaway, the link to the Atlantic where they live, that caused them to invade, basically. So, what the adults do, the females will go and send out a signal through a specialized bile that they make in their gills. That bile is put out and is a signal for mating, and all the males will be brought in because they can detect it by their vasonasal organ, VNO, which is right here. So they have that bile, brings them in, there is mass spawning, and then these eggs will hatch, the larvae will go and live in the rivers, in the freshwater for a couple of years, depending on the species, and then travel out to the ocean where their entire physiology changes to live in salt water. And I am not understating this enough. An ability to switch your whole body and survive in salt water versus freshwater is a humongous change. You have to turn off a whole bunch of genes, turn on a whole other bunch of genes so you can breathe and survive and excrete and get fresh water in all of these things without dying. So it's a huge, huge thing. Sharks can't do that except for bull sharks, as far as I know. And bull sharks are just nasty. But when you find them up in the Ohio River Valley and Mississippi after a flood or something, it makes you reevaluate how safe you are in Wisconsin, in the Midwest. But these animals are rare to transition, but there's a reason for it. Okay, salmon do it too. Okay, and then they die. Hagfish are really interesting because they produce a slime, and that slime expands and gets in almost to a jelly, like aerogel or something like that. You can see through it, but man, it's sticky, and it expands. And if there is a predator that tries to bite them, because they don't have much jaws, they're just feeding on dead fish and tissue on the bottom of the ocean. They will coil into a ball to make it harder to fight, and they'll basically squeeze off a whole bunch of the slime that expands, and it chokes off the breathing of these fish. There is some video I'm going to show you later on how the sharks will just try to bite this and immediately go away, shaking their head, and you can see all the slime going from their mouth. Hagfish, I would love to get one here, but you cannot have it in a tank with anything else because it'll kill it because of the slime. Also pumps. Slime isn't good on pumps. So I was nade on that one. But no jaws. Now, the interesting thing about this is that they have this cycle. And this is the thing we're going to finish on next to this slide and the next slide are both on agnathans. There was some really good research on figuring out how they draw in their reproductive partners for lampreys because we want to get rid of these things. So we had to do some basic science. They identified the bile, which is different than the bile that's made in our liver or their liver. They make it in their gills. They're going, that's kind of odd. Got to figure out what this means. They figured out it was a sexual attractant for the males. They managed to synthesize. So what we do now is we have chemical traps for the females and the males where there's a thin body of water that goes into a trap and then it's filtered and then pumped back out. We put bile, the synthesized bile out there, and the lampreys will come in by the hundreds into these traps. And we catch hundreds and thousands of these lampreys before they can reproduce, all because of a baited trap. And then we have a whole seething ball of tons of these lampreys, which is a nightmare fuel for some of you. So we grind it up and give it to dogs, or use it as fertilizer. The end. Right. But I don't. I just was told that it was used in dog food, but mostly fertilizer. I don't know. I think it's fish. I don't know. Okay, so this is another picture of that trout or the lake trout. But look at that hole that was dug into it. It does not make this reproductively successful a lot of the time. So the whole idea is it went in from the Atlantic Ocean through and went to the Great Lakes. But we have areas, we have traps and sensor detection areas for all these places to trap them. And we've had a very successful war. We're winning the war against those lampreys right now. So all because of some basic science and some hunting methods. Okay. I am going to put up a quiz for this weekend. So look for that. I'll send out an email when it's up. And in 2 weeks, we're going to have a test just to cover all of the phylogeny and finish that up. Okay? So we'll have from Annelida, Mollusca, and Arthropoda all the way through the end. And this will probably take probably next week, and then we'll be done with phylogeny. But I will give you some examples in the lab. We might even move the lab if I'm getting done with all this to next week. We're going to have to look at all the different animals and kind of identify it as phyla, to the phyla and the class. So be aware for that. In 2 weeks, I want to have the presentation, hopefully for the for your group work. So make sure to take a look at your plants twice a week. I think I fixed the misting, so I'm going to take a look at that now. It looks like everything's getting watered. So, okay. Have a great weekend. Don't lick doorknobs. Look out for that quiz. Okay.